So, what's this? This is FRS Holland, Free Radio Service Holland, 7.7 megahertz. Top end of the 41 metre band. A well-known free radio station, pirate radio station, whatever you want to call it. This is one of the early stations that one of the early pirate stations that I first heard 40 odd years ago, still around today. So today I'm going to talk about pirate radio in Europe, that is, or hobby radio. And I just thought I'd show you that some of these old stations we'll talk about, a few of them are still around today, most are not. But stay with me as we look at the pirate radio scene back in the 1980s and early 1990s. And then in future videos we'll talk about the present day situation with pirate radio. I first became aware of shortwave pirate stations early on in my shortwave listening career, if you want to call it that. That was in the early 1980s. Started listening to shortwave sort of semi-seriously in about 1981, 1982. Now, as I just said, when I'm talking about pirate radio stations here, I'm talking about hobby stations. They were generally individuals who had an interest in broadcasting, maybe an interest in music as well. Quite often they were using home-built gear, home-built valve transmitters and this sort of thing. But they weren't putting these stations on for any kind of financial advantage. It was purely a hobby. It's often referred to as free radio. And in Europe, in the UK and Europe, it was quite commonplace to hear these stations generally on a Sunday morning. And they would generally be between 6.2 and 6.4 megahertz on the 48 metre band. And then the top end of 41 metres, sort of 7.3, 7.4, 7.5 megs, around there. As I say, generally on a Sunday morning. Occasionally you might hear one on a Saturday or something like that. In the 1980s, there were many stations of this nature, quite a lot of them in the UK, a good number of them in Ireland, another good number of them in Holland, a lot of Dutch stations, but also a few German, Italian stations and so on. Now, it's hard to believe these days, but back then in some shortwave circles, listening to these pirates was slightly frowned upon, really, because they were illegal stations. Mainstream radio magazines, Practical Wireless in the UK comes to mind. Practical Wireless had a shortwave broadcast listening column, but you would never see reports of the pirates in there. They wouldn't accept those. And I remember one particular DX club in the UK that I was a member of. Back in the 80s, there was quite a bit of debate over whether they would carry logs, reception reports of these free radio stations, because they were illegal and some people felt that they shouldn't be publicised. But nevertheless, they had a big following. As you'll see from my logs, there'll be one or two familiar names from the 1980s, which is now 40 odd years ago, that are still around today. But there were many more that came and went. And some of the stations that I've logged, they may have only made one or two transmissions. We don't know. So we're going to have a look at my logbook. We're going to have a look at a few QSL cards that I've received over certainly in the 1980s from these pirate radio stations. And we'll also have a couple of recording clips. So hope you enjoy it. First station in the log is actually a station called South Dublin Radio on 6240 kilohertz.
Okay, it's time to go to home again. It's 1 minute past the hour of 1 o'clock. For the last 2 hours you've been tuned to SDR on the 48 meter band on 6240 kilohertz. And the music you've been listening to as presented by yours truly, Phil Dixon. Indeed, the Phil Dixon Show will be on the air again next week around about 11 o'clock BST. I'd like to hear from you. The mailing address, SDR, North Street, Swords, County Dublin, in Ireland.
you may recognise some of the other names. Let's have a look. West Side Radio Cavendish. That was a fairly short-lived station, I think. I do have a recording of that somewhere. West Side Radio, another Republic of Ireland station. Very, very regular transmitter. Every sort of Sunday morning they were on the 48 metre band. Later went on to become Ozone Radio through the 90s and early 2000s. No longer around now.
Right here on Radio West Side.
Well, you're Shirley back up here, and that was walking year of 1963 by a tremendous piece of music. You also had the relay from Radio City on 257 metres on the medium wave. You tuned to Westside Radio International on 6280 in the 49 metre band. Moving on to Sonny Asher on this one was released in 1966. I'm sure you remember this cool little man. Good morning to Podney side out there in Cornwall. Good morning to you, Podney.
Hexagon, I don't think was a long-lived station. Radio Krypton was quite a well-known station at the time. You see, I've got a note there. I'd obviously tried to QSL with Krypton, but never had a reply. Radio East Coast Commercial. We've got a little recording of them somewhere.
For them, but that wasn't the answer that we were looking for. But being as you took the bother to write, Stuart, I'm going to send you another pair of socks. No, I'll send you something in a way of thanking you for voting for me in the FRS Top DJ poll. If you haven't, I'm not going to send you nothing. Anyway, I just had another look at your letter, Stuart, and apparently the Simpo he gives us is all the fives. So he must be really banging in there in Halifax, some megastar in Halifax. And he gives us the Simpo report for a Sunday morning test transmission we did on the 19th of September. And he gives us all the, the little bit of drifting here and a fuzzy modulation there and sounds Irish in origin, what he's on about there. But he says, sorry I can't be more technical, but I...
Radio 49 Britain Radio, that was another regular. Radio Freebird Germany. Radio Atlantis, again, that was a regular. I've actually got a stereo recording of Radio Atlantis. And it's slightly chopped off the bottom of this particular page, but if you can just about make up weekend music there, that's Weekend Music Radio, still around today. You can see I first heard them in 1983, so 42 years later they're still to be heard on the bands. So, let's go to the second page. Radio Milan, don't remember much about them, I'm guessing they were in Italy. Radio Apollo. Now, Radio Apollo was one of my favourite shortwave free radio broadcasters. I made a note, they're interesting programs, always QSLs. I had a few QSL cards from them. The main presenter, DJ, was a guy called, or known anyway, as Dave Scott. I'm relatively certain that wasn't his real name. But really used to enjoy Radio Apollo.
Remind you tuned to Apollo DX from Radio Apollo International in the 41 metre band. And if you'd like to write to us, our address is PO Box 319, Edenbridge in Kent. And you're listening to Dave Scott with a cold. So I apologise for my voice today. I'm to the door to see if his prizes arrived. Yes, we give all the best prizes here on Radio Apollo. Right, this is Dave Scott with you here on Apollo Island, broadcasting via South Dublin Radio. It's gone very quiet here in the Scott-based studio now. I'm all on my own now.
BBMS down here, Britain's better music station. They were regulars. Radio 48 Shortwave, Radio Delmara. And here's another one, look at the bottom, still around today, FRS Holland, Free Radio Service Holland. I first heard them 42 years ago. They're still going. Let's have a look for some other familiar names here. Here's a couple of funny ones. Voice of the Leak and Radio Pluto Wales. Voice of the Leak was a spoof station. I think it was the guys from Radio Apollo that were behind Voice of the Leak. They certainly said they were broadcasting from Wales. Don't know if they were. There were some rather dodgy false Welsh accents in evidence, but I do have a recording somewhere, a Voice of the Leaker short recording, and Radio Pluto Wales was another station claimed to be from, or transmitting from Wales. Let's have a look at some more. Radio Stellar International, that was a Scottish broadcaster. Radio Gemini, they were a fairly regular station as well. Misty Mountain Radio, I can recall them, only ever heard them once, but unusually they were broadcasting from Northern Ireland, which was back in 1984. There weren't any other that I was aware of free radio stations in the north of Ireland, so that was quite interesting. What else have we got? Shamrock Radio, I think they were a short-lived station. Certainly didn't hear them very often. Radio Bluebird, Falcon Radio, Radio Tonnerre. I think they were pretty regular. Radio Marabou. I think they've been around in fairly recent times. I've got Radio Julie here, which was an all-female station. I've got a clip of a studio recording from Radio Julie somewhere. Apologies for this, got a bit of folded up in the scanner by the looks of it. Radio Pamela, I think they're still around today, Radio Pamela, aren't they? Radio Rainbow, World Music Radio, a couple of familiar sounding names there. Starboard Sound, PFBS, Pirate Freaks Broadcasting Service, a Dutch station that. Radio Orion 6265, that was another regular on the bands. What else have we got? Super Clan Radio, Radio Sovereign, Radio Mirage. No real sort of big names here. I think a lot of these stations who were coming into the late 80s, now 1987, weren't heard that often. And I think this is the last page. Radio Fax. Now, Radio Fax was an interesting station that broadcast, I think it was at one stage, it seemed to be on 24/7 on 6220. And it was an all-talk station, no music, and it was all sort of technical talk about radio and electronics. It's quite an interesting station and quite an undertaking because it was on so often. I think the transmitter was based in Republic of Ireland for that one as well. Here's an interesting one, Alternative Vatican Radio. Don't remember much about them. From Italy, 6250. Interesting name. WNKR, another interesting name. You've got to make sure you put the right letters in that one. That is West and North Kent Radio. I believe they were also on medium wave at one time. And Radio Delta down here. Look, Radio Delta 6275. From the Netherlands. I've no idea if that's any connection with the licensed Radio Delta that we hear these days on shortwave. But it may well be, I don't know. Let's have a look at a few QSL cards that I managed to collect when I was listening to the Pirates back in the 1980s. And on the left here we can see Radio Apollo. One of my favourite pirate radio stations back then. You can see one of their QSL cards. This is for a July 83 broadcast. And you can see a typical time that these stations would be on, sort of 5 to 9 and between 5 to 9 and 9:30. That's when I was listening. 7340 kilohertz, and the transmitter was just 20 watts output. And then on the right we've got Atlanta Radio. On 6240 kilohertz, they're only using 15 watts into a dipole. Oh, and obviously they came in relatively well with me. You can see the Simpo report. Again, this is March, looks like March 1985. This one's a little bit later. The QSL from Atlanta. A very popular one back at the time, Britain Radio International. You see on the left there, 1983. Again, relatively low power, 20 watts transmitter, all the three Simpo, and signed by Roger Davis, who was, I think, the main presenter on Britain Radio. And another 1985 QSL on the right for Radio Atlantis. They're on 6225, we can see. I've got two P.O. Box addresses, one in Germany and one in Norfolk in England, UK. Now bear in mind, of course, back in the 80s there was no email. No mobile phones either, so the only way to get in touch with these stations was to write them a letter. Because they were illegal broadcasters, they couldn't use a home address, so generally they had some kind of P.O. box for them to collect their mail. Here we have Radio East Coast Commercial. Now, they would broadcast on a Saturday, as you can see on the QSL card. Quite unusual for the Pirates at the time. This was a Saturday broadcast. Quite a good report there from me. Simple 44434. We've got 20 past 12 to 1300, the time I was listening. And an interesting QSL card with a whale on the sea and a GPO man, a GPO officer in his little boat there. So there you go, that's Radio East Coast Commercial. And we have Channel Radio International from 1983 on 6255 kilohertz. I picked them up there, you can see, even though they were just using 10 watts into a half-wave dipole. So all of these stations are relatively low power. If you can see, I think we saw it in one of the earlier QSL cards there, the FFFR. And it's about fighting for free radio. That's what that stands for, Fight for Free Radio. So there you go. Radio Freedom International. We've got a Scottish station here. Back in 1983, slightly higher power, that one, 60 watts, 6230. And on the right then, Radio Gemini, and quite a powerful transmitter from Gemini, 150 watts. I can see they've actually got what appears to be a residential address on their QSL card there, but I guess they would have some kind of mail forward on that. Very unlikely that the station itself, the transmitter, was located there. And here we have Starboard Sound on 6300 kilohertz. This one hasn't got a power output for the transmitter. Have we got a date on that? Yep, 1985, 27th October 1985. And Radio 48 on the right with 17 watts. From 1983. And just to round things off, I thought I'd show you a couple of resources if you're interested in the free radio, pirate radio, European broadcasters. There's a very good resource here, the DX Archive homepage, and that takes you through some of the, particularly the Irish stations on medium wave and shortwave, but some basic shortwave pirate information from UK stations as well. You can see we've got ABC England, Radio Apollo, which we mentioned, Empire Radio, Radio Enterprise, various stations listed here with some very useful information on them, land-based stations. And if we look at some of the Irish stations here as well, we've got an A to Z of Irish shortwave pirates, and they're all listed here. Misty Mountain Radio, there's a little bit more information about them. Remember them from my logbook, and we've actually got an example of a QSL from Misty Mountain, and it actually claims to be the first free radio station to be broadcast from Northern Ireland, and I reckon that would be the case. So that's that one. And Ozone Radio I mentioned, and there's some QSLs from Ozone. So highly recommended, the DX Archive. And if we also remember from my logbook, I talked about Radio Fax. And I only found this site when I was doing a little bit of research for this video. I wasn't aware of this one before. But there is a whole web page dedicated to Radio Fax and its activities between 1988 and 1992. There are some audio clips from the station and all sorts of things that tell you about how Radio Fax tried to apply for an official broadcast license and were refused as well. So that's Radio Fax, very interesting web page, and the DX Archive. There are other resources. They're the main ones that I've used in the past. So if you're interested in this little piece of information on pirate radio, I hope you enjoyed it. I'll do another couple in the future. Let me know your experiences of listening to the free radio stations, whether you're interested, whether you've ever heard of them before, or whether, like me, they played a part in you getting interested in the hobby. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, well, give me a like, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you again soon in the next video. Thank you.